Welcome to Life Stories. Imagine living a life where you give everything your time, your energy, your love, and yet you're never truly seen. Not by the people you care about most, not by the ones you've sacrificed everything for. What happens when you finally decide to stop playing the role they've written for you? What happens when, after decades of being invisible, you step into the light and say, "This time, I choose me"? In today's story, a woman who has spent her life holding the pieces together for everyone else is about to face the hardest decision of all, choosing herself over the family that's always expected her to be everything, without ever asking what she needed. Stay with us to see what happens when a woman decides to live for herself. As Sarah steps away from everything she's known, one question remains. Can she truly find freedom, or will her past come crashing back? Sarah Blake sat on the edge of the kitchen counter, her fingers absently tracing the edge of an old weathered recipe book. The smell of coffee lingered in the air, thick and comforting, but there was no warmth left for her. At 65, she had spent a lifetime giving, first to her husband, then to her children, and now to her grandchildren, but it felt like she had been giving to a void. The medical report sat on the coffee table, untouched, a cruel reminder of her diagnosis. 3 days it had been there, just sitting, waiting to be noticed, but not one person in her family had asked about it. She had always been the one to take care of everything: the meals, the laundry, the school pickups, the cleaning. Sarah was the silent force that kept their world spinning, even though no one ever stopped to ask if she was okay, if she needed help. Even now, as the weight of her cancer diagnosis pressed against her chest, no one seemed to care. It wasn't until the fourth day, when Sarah missed dinner preparation due to a follow-up appointment at the hospital, that the phone began to ring incessantly. The world outside seemed so chaotic, so overwhelming, with cars honking and the city's noise buzzing around her. But inside, everything felt suffocatingly silent, except for the ringing phone. It was Michael, her son. His voice was sharp, demanding, "Mom, why haven't you picked up Zach from school yet? He's still there," crying his eyes out. "Why didn't you tell me you had an appointment today?" His words lashed out like whips, and Sarah felt the sting in her chest. She hadn't even told him about her appointment, about the pain that had been growing inside her for weeks. She hadn't told him anything, because what good was it? It wasn't as if he'd cared before. "I told Daniel this morning I couldn't do it today," Sarah replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "He was supposed to pick him up." But before she could explain further, Michael interrupted her, his voice thick with irritation. "God, Mom, what could be more important than Zach? He's your grandson. And now you're making us all late." The phone call ended with a bitter click, leaving Sarah feeling as if the air had been sucked from the room. She stood in the crowded bus, a wave of dizziness washing over her, and held her breath as the reality of her situation sank in. Her hand gripped the medical report tightly. How long had she been hiding behind these walls, pretending everything was fine? Why hadn't she told anyone what was really happening to her? The weight of it all pressed down on her chest, and she realized she had no one to talk to, no one who truly saw her anymore. She was just a caretaker, an afterthought in her own family. She glanced out the bus window, watching the city pass by in a blur, and for the first time, she felt like she was fading into the background. The phone rang again. It was James, her husband. His voice, always so calm, so controlled, now crackled with frustration. "Clara, why didn't you pick up Zach? His teacher's been waiting for hours. What's going on with you?" But Sarah, no longer the dutiful wife, no longer the selfless grandmother, felt something inside her snap. "He's not just my responsibility, James," she said, her tone colder than she had ever let it be. "He has a mother and a father. Maybe it's time they start taking care of their own child." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Sarah could almost hear the confusion in James's mind as he processed her words. "Clara, what's this about?" he asked, the concern in his voice now laced with annoyance. "You've always done everything. What's changed?" She stood there on the bus, feeling her body tremble from the weight of her words. You've never seen me, James. Not really. All these years, you've never seen me. The call ended abruptly, and Sarah felt a strange sense of liberation. It wasn't just about the dinner she hadn't made or the child she hadn't picked up. It was about something much deeper. Her whole life had been spent pleasing others, serving them, and now she was done. The realization hit her like a wave, a sharp realization that she had been invisible, her needs and desires buried under years of sacrifice. But no more. When she reached home, the familiar chaos greeted her. The children scattered, half-eaten meals left on the table, Zach throwing a tantrum because there was no dinner, and the cold, empty eyes of her husband, who was too preoccupied with his own plans to notice the change in her. The moment was surreal. She had spent decades giving everything to this family, and yet none of them could even be bothered to ask her how she was doing or why she was late. She closed the door quietly, stepping into the bedroom. There, her medical report lay, still untouched. The weight of it felt unbearable now. She wasn't going to let it define her any longer. And so, without a word to anyone, she packed a small bag and left. The decision was sudden, but it was a long time coming. For the first time in decades, Sarah was choosing herself. She wasn't just going to stay home and be the invisible force holding everyone together. She was going to live for her own happiness, for her own peace. And if that meant walking away from everything she had known, then so be it. Her journey took her to a small, cozy art gallery in Portland, a place she had always dreamed of visiting. She wandered through the exhibits, feeling the soft, warm light of the paintings wash over her. For the first time, she could breathe. She wasn't anyone's wife, anyone's mother. She was just Sarah, a woman rediscovering the things that made her feel alive. As she walked through the city, she was approached by a kind, young woman named Grace. She offered Sarah a tissue, noticing the sadness in her eyes. Their conversation was light, but Sarah felt an unexpected connection with Grace. There was kindness in her eyes, a warmth Sarah hadn't felt in years. "Do you need a ride home?" Grace asked, offering to take Sarah wherever she needed to go. "No, thank you," Sarah replied softly. "I need to figure things out on my own." But Grace smiled, nodding in understanding. "Well, I hope you find what you're looking for, Sarah." Sarah walked away with a heavy heart, but a light step. She wasn't sure where she was going, but for the first time in years, she felt free. But freedom came at a price. As Sarah turned her phone back on, the flood of messages from her family began. Desperation and panic mixed with guilt and anger. James's voice was the first she heard, crackling with a mixture of concern and frustration. "Why didn't you tell us, Sarah? You can't just disappear. We need you." The messages grew louder, more urgent. "We can't do this without you. You can't leave us now." But Sarah didn't answer. She couldn't. And then the final message from James, sent in a moment of raw emotion. "If you walk away now, don't ever come back." Sarah stood still, staring at the screen. The words stung, but they didn't break her. In that moment, she realized something vital. This wasn't just about leaving. It was about finally understanding that her life, her happiness, had never been in their hands. It had always been in her own. As Sarah walked away from her past, she couldn't help but feel a spark of hope. Could she really start over? Could she finally live a life she wanted, free from the expectations of others? What would you do if your whole life was spent in service to others, only to realize that you've been invisible to them all along? How would you reclaim your power after years of being taken for granted? With a new sense of determination, Sarah headed toward the next chapter of her life. But what awaited her was more than she ever expected. Would she truly be able to leave it all behind, or would the ghosts of her past catch up with her? Stay tuned to find out what happens next. Sarah's footsteps echoed in the quiet terminal as she stepped off the plane. Portland had greeted her with its usual cool, damp air, but today it felt different, calm, peaceful. She was free, or so she thought. The weight that had crushed her for years seemed to lift, but it was only replaced by a different kind of silence, one that was both liberating and haunting. She wandered through the city, losing herself in the streets, her steps light with the kind of freedom she had never known. Her life, once filled with the chaos of family demands, now stretched out before her, vast and empty. For the first time in ages, she could think, really think, without being interrupted by phone calls or urgent needs. She could do whatever she wanted. No more waiting for anyone's approval, no more serving their needs. But as she walked down a quiet street, something pulled at her, a tug at the back of her mind. The messages from her family had stopped, but they lingered like ghosts, echoing in her head. Her children's voices, filled with accusation and guilt, had haunted her on the flight. If you walk away now, don't ever come back. The words were harsh, yet they stung in a way she didn't expect. She stopped at a small cafe, sitting at the window, her eyes tracing the city as the coffee in her hand began to cool. Her phone remained silent, but the quiet was heavy. She had expected this, her family's anger, their guilt, but what she hadn't expected was the void she felt inside, the loneliness that had crept in despite the decision she had made to leave. For the first time, the quiet felt like an enemy. Her thoughts were interrupted by a tap on the glass. She looked up, startled, and saw Grace standing outside, waving gently. The young woman had been her quiet strength through this journey, the one person who had treated her like she was more than just a mother, more than just a caretaker. Sarah smiled faintly, feeling a flicker of warmth as Grace entered and sat across from her. "Everything okay?" Grace asked softly, her voice filled with concern. "I'm fine," Sarah replied, though she wasn't entirely sure she believed it. "Just still getting used to this new life." Grace nodded, her eyes studying Sarah. "You've done something incredible, Sarah. You've reclaimed your life. That's not easy." Sarah nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. She couldn't escape the thought that she was being selfish, that maybe she was wrong to leave. What if she had been too quick to sever ties? Her family needed her, right? Or did they? They never seemed to notice when she was falling apart. The internal conflict began to churn again, stirring up the old guilt. It was so easy to walk away when it was just her life at stake but now she wondered if she had made a mistake. Maybe she had been too harsh, too quick to leave everything behind. Maybe she had left without even trying to fix things. She picked up her phone, her fingers hovering over the screen as she debated calling her children, her husband, just to check in. "Sarah," Grace said, pulling her out of the haze of her thoughts, "you've done what's best for you. You don't owe them anything. If they really want you back, they have to show it." The words hung in the air between them. Could Sarah really walk away from everything, from everyone? Was it wrong to choose herself for the first time in years? Just as she opened her mouth to speak, her phone buzzed. It was a message from James. Her heart skipped a beat, a mixture of dread and curiosity tightening her chest. She hesitated before reading it. "I made a mistake," it read. "I don't know what I'm doing. I've been an idiot, Sarah. I don't want to lose you." She stared at the message, her thumb frozen above the screen. Her mind raced. What did he mean? Was this guilt? Was he finally realizing what she had done for years? Or was it just another empty plea, another effort to keep her under his thumb, to keep her in her place? "Don't answer him," Grace said quietly, seeing the expression on Sarah's face. "Don't fall for it. You've worked so hard to get here. Don't let his words pull you back in." But Sarah's hands trembled as she read the message again. He sounded genuine, remorseful even. Could this really be the moment of change? Could he be telling the truth? "Maybe he's right," Sarah murmured, almost to herself. "Maybe I've been too quick to close the door. Maybe I need to listen." Grace's expression softened, but she didn't back down. "You don't owe him anything, Sarah. He's had years to show you he cares. Don't let one message make you doubt everything you've fought for." Sarah stared at the phone, the words swirling in her head. But the truth was, she wasn't sure what she wanted. Did she want to go back? Did she want to forgive him? Or did she want to leave it all behind and never look back? Her phone buzzed again, this time with a call. It was Michael. Her chest tightened. He never called unless it was urgent. She let it ring for a moment. But before she could decide whether or not to answer, Grace spoke again. Are you going to answer that? Sarah didn't know. She was tired of being the person they all relied on, tired of being the one who always picked up the pieces. She had done it for so long, but now, for the first time, she wasn't sure she had anything left to give. Grace looked at her, eyes full of understanding, and then leaned back in her chair. Do what feels right for you. Not for them. You've earned the right to live for yourself. The words hit Sarah like a wave, crashing over her, washing away the uncertainty. She had spent her life trying to be everything to everyone else. Maybe it was time to be nothing to anyone. Just Sarah. With a deep breath, she ended the call without answering, setting the phone down on the table between them. The decision felt strange, but freeing. The weight she had carried for so long began to lift, just a little. Thank you, Sarah said quietly, her voice soft, for reminding me that I matter too. Grace smiled. I'm just helping you remember what you've always known. As they sat there in silence, the future seemed wide open, filled with possibilities Sarah had never allowed herself to imagine. She didn't know where it would lead, but for the first time in a long while, she felt like she was in control. But just as the calm settled in, the phone rang again. This time, it was a message from her daughter, Anna. Mom, we need to talk. There's something you need to know. Please come home. The words lingered in the air, a knot forming in Sarah's stomach. What was it? What had happened now? What would you do if you were finally given the chance to live for yourself, but the past kept pulling you back? Can Sarah really move on from everything she's known, or will the ties to her family keep her from embracing the freedom she's longed for? The air in the room thickened, and Sarah's mind raced as she realized this wasn't over. There was still so much left to uncover, and now she had to decide whether to confront her past or let it go once and for all. The choice would be hers, again. Sarah stood in the dim light of the hospital courtyard, her heart a storm of conflicting emotions. The conversation with her family had rattled her, but she had remained resolute in her decision to embrace her new life. As the doctor finished his consultation, giving her the all clear for the time being, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was standing on the edge of something huge, something that might finally bring her the peace she so desperately needed. But the call had come just before her appointment. Anna's voice, frantic and tinged with fear, had cracked through the silence of her day. Mom, we need to talk. There's something you need to know. Please come home. The urgency in her tone, the way her words seemed to hang in the air like a dark cloud, gnawed at Sarah's insides. She had refused to answer. She had already made her choice, hadn't she? She wasn't going back to the same old routines, the same old responsibilities. She was free, free to live for herself, free to create a life outside of their demands. But what did freedom really mean if it was just running away? It was easy to shut out the voices of her family, to block their calls, to step away from the suffocating grip of their expectations. But it was harder to ignore the ache in her chest, the longing for something real, something tangible. Her heart tugged at her, reminding her of all the years spent building a life for them, for James, for the kids, even for the grandchildren. All the sacrifices she made to keep everyone else happy. Had it been worth it? She couldn't help but remember the years she had spent in silence, watching the world pass her by as she quietly gave, quietly endured, never asking for anything in return. She had always believed that one day they would see her, would recognize her worth. But they hadn't. The sound of footsteps approaching broke her thoughts. She looked up to find Grace standing there, her expression kind, her eyes understanding. Without a word, Grace reached out and gently touched Sarah's arm, as if grounding her in the present moment. You don't have to do this alone, Grace said softly, her voice steady with warmth. You've already taken the hardest step, but it's okay to take the next one too. Sarah felt the weight of those words sink deep into her chest. It was okay to move forward. It was okay to let go. As they stood together, watching the soft glow of the hospital lights flicker in the distance, Sarah finally made her decision. She would not run. She would not continue to hide behind the walls she had built for so long. But she wasn't going back either. Not to the life she had left behind, not to the people who had never truly seen her. The next morning, Sarah found herself standing outside her old home, the house that had once been a sanctuary, but now felt like a prison. The front door was ajar, as if inviting her back in. She took a deep breath and stepped inside. Everything was just as she had left it. The familiar smell of the living room, the cluttered kitchen counters, the half-finished puzzles on the dining table. But the faces that greeted her were different. She had expected confrontation, an argument, perhaps even guilt. Instead, there was silence, heavy and suffocating. James was sitting in his favorite armchair, looking smaller, more fragile than she remembered. His hair, once carefully styled, was now unkempt, his eyes tired, as if years of worry and regret had finally caught up to him. Clara. He said her name like a question, a whisper. He hadn't called her that in years. You came back. I never left, she replied quietly. I just stopped being invisible. The words hit him like a slap. He looked at her, his expression crumbling in disbelief. I never meant for it to be like this, he murmured, his voice heavy with something Sarah couldn't place. Was it regret? Or guilt? Maybe not, Sarah said softly, but that doesn't change what happened. You saw me, James, but you never really saw me. Not until it was too late. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The house around them felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Sarah had always been the one to hold everything together, the one to fill the silence, to make everything seem okay. But now, the silence was hers to hold. Just as she was about to turn and leave, she heard it, a soft voice calling her name. It was Anna, standing in the doorway, her face a mixture of confusion and hurt. Mom, please, we just wanted to make things right. I know, Sarah replied, her voice steady, but right doesn't mean staying in a place that's been suffocating me for years. Anna took a step forward, her eyes wide with realization. Is this about Vivian? She asked, her voice small, vulnerable. Sarah shook her head, a quiet sadness settling over her. It's not about her. It's about me. I've spent my entire life being what everyone else wanted me to be. I never asked for anything in return. But now, I need to live for myself. Her words hung in the air, raw and exposed. Anna's eyes softened, and for a moment, Sarah saw a flicker of the child she had raised, the one who used to look to her for everything. But that was a long time ago. I'm sorry, Mom. Anna whispered, her voice trembling. We never meant to make you feel invisible. Sarah smiled faintly, the weight of the years shifting slightly off her shoulders. I know, sweetheart, but I can't keep pretending. I have to be something more than just this house, this family. I have to be me. For the first time in years, Sarah felt the strength in her own voice, in her own choices. She had been invisible for so long, but now, for the first time, she was seen. By herself. She turned and walked toward the door. But just before she stepped out, she felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned to find Grace standing there, her face filled with quiet support. You don't have to go back, Grace said softly, her voice full of understanding. You're already moving forward. Don't let anything hold you back. Sarah nodded, her heart finally at peace. She didn't need anyone's approval anymore. She didn't need to explain herself. The only thing that mattered now was the life she was going to build, a life she could call her own. And as she walked away from the house, the weight of her past slowly melted away. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, she felt the promise of something new, something beautiful, something hers. How would you feel if you finally stood up for yourself after years of being unseen? Could Sarah's decision to walk away from everything lead to the happiness she's always deserved? Or will the past find its way back into her life? As Sarah stepped into the unknown, the city lights flickering in the distance, she realized that she was no longer just surviving. She was finally living.